All right, welcome everyone. So we are so happy and excited today to be having this discussion. This is such an important discussion, and we bring together some great minds. Our topic today is discussing the Lake Institute's recent study. So if you haven't already kind of printed out your copy, just to remind everyone, there's a copy to the link, or the link rather, to the study in the chat box there. How are congregations being affected by COVID-19? My name is Dr. Adrienne Billis. I am the Director of Leadership here with the Episcopal Church Foundation. And I'm going to be your moderator. I'm going to be looking at our chat box. I'm also going to be doing a little bit of tech. It's really kind of like a potpourri of different tasks here to keep our conversation going. So before I let our panelists introduce themselves, just want to go through some quick and easy tech. For those of you who might be new to Zoom, though, let's be honest, most of us have been on Zoom for so many months now. I feel like I live in Zoom. But just to remind you, at the bottom of your screen, there is like a text bubble there with chat. I'll be monitoring that, so please feel free to post or type your questions and comments for our presenters. And I'll be sure to be that person in case our presenters are in conversation to make sure that I kind of seamlessly weave those into the conversation. Also, I just want to tell you about the Q&A. That is also down here. It's 2 text bubbles. Please feel free to use that as well. If you want to post a question there, I'll be monitoring that as well. So again, seamlessly weaving this, keeping this conversation going. But I'm so excited that you're here today and to share the data and some just ways that we can actually interpret it, look at it, and use it as we move forward in this crazy, stressful, and hopeful time. So Dr. David King, can I just pass it to you to just introduce yourselves to our attendees today?
Sure, thanks, Adrienne. Thanks for the chance to be with you all, and it really is a delight. My name is David King and come from the Lake Institute. So I'm the director of the Lake Institute on Faith and Giving. We're housed in the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. So we often say we're the best school of philanthropy in the world because we're really the only school of philanthropy in the world. So I teach as an associate professor there, teach courses on religion and ethics to our undergraduates, masters, doctoral students. But most of my work is actually focused in on the Lake Institute. So our mission really is focused on research and scholarship, like this study. It's focused on teaching and training, working with congregational leaders, faith-based nonprofits around stewardship and generosity work, and then building up a larger conversation around public understanding. So some of these questions that really fit into what is the public good? How can we engage across difference for these types of conversations? They all filter up to the big questions that we all are interested in too, particularly as faith leaders. It's a great place for me to be. I've always had the vocational goal, I'm ordained Baptist minister. Am I tied to the church? Am I tied to the academy? And I really get a chance to have a foot in both worlds and be out on the road in earlier 2020 and before, working most days with congregational leaders and faith-based nonprofit leaders. So it's great to be here. I really appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Reverend Dr. Manoj Zechariah, welcome. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, y'all. My name is Manoj Zechariah. I am the rector of St. Anne's Parish in the heart of downtown Annapolis. I have an academic interest, which is in philosophical theology, philosophy of religion. But my deep passion is parish life and the ebbs and flows of understanding how the parish is called to live into the common good. And in order to live into the common good, it requires resources and cultivating resources in order for the church to carry out the mission of the church. And so it is an honor and a privilege to be with all of you. I am on this panel as a learner and as someone who may have some insights, but I think I'm going to get a lot more insights from all of you. So thank you all.
Bill Campbell, last but not least.
Hey everybody, my name is Bill Campbell. I'm the Director of Institutional Advancement here at ECF. It's a real honor and privilege to be able to work with so many amazing and talented people, especially Adrian. I appreciate all the ways in which you organize this herd of cats at ECF and create these amazing opportunities. And Manoj and David, thank you so much for being willing to come here and share your wisdom. I might join in occasionally throughout the conversation. I'm particularly interested in the cross-section of stewardship and discipleship. And there's a lot in this study that speaks on the edges of discipleship and certainly speaks directly to the heart of stewardship. I'm really excited about some of the possibilities that the study implies, and I'm looking forward to a great conversation today. Thanks, everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And welcome again to everyone. I wanted to start off, David, and I think Manoj, we had spoken yesterday, and you had this great term, the summary of a summary. I was wondering, David, if you could kind of lead us off with some of the kind of most interesting or surprising findings from this study.
Sure, I love the idea of a summary of a summary. But the general picture is we were really interested at Lake Institute. We've done studies in the past that are sort of large, nationally representative samples of congregations. The problem is we don't have much data on congregations across the board because we don't report as congregations on a 990 like other faith-based, other nonprofits might be. So it's sort of a black box of what's actually happening with church finances, as how we manage, how we spend, how we receive those funds. So we have done the national study of congregations' economic practices a few years ago, NCEP. We're good at a lot of things at Lake. I'm not quite sure acronyms are our strong suit, but most recently we really were interested in putting together sort of a snapshot study of what's happening in the midst of the multiple pandemics that we've been engaged with or responding to in 2020. And so we were in the field. We were working with congregations from in July. So we have data, what's been happening from February before most congregations shut down in early March until the end of June. One thing, so we looked at really what was been happening, what trends around giving and participation. But we also turned particularly thinking about what's happening now in this season and asking congregational leaders about their hopes, their anxieties, the challenges as they're looking ahead for the rest of this year and into the next, particularly thinking of this season as oftentimes, our prime stewardship pledge season as we're looking towards next year and into the end of the year as well. I would say we were actually really, I think, hopeful that overall more congregations, a majority of congregations were maintaining or even increasing their giving over the course of from March until June, which is a bit surprising. A little 41% were decreasing, but holding your own in these days is I would say an accomplishment for most congregations. It happened across church size. It happened across religious tradition. This study has a really large sample of mainline Protestant congregations. About half of our congregations were mainliners, and so I think it fits into the larger story of what many of our attendees, hope imagining in the Episcopal Church are facing. Could talk much more about sort of the hopes and uncertainties because I think that might be interesting to us. But let me stop there, and we can continue.
Sure. Manoj, I wanted to ask you a similar one, but from the different perspective. You spoke about kind of parish life and the importance of that in your own life. And I was wondering, David gives this great kind of as the academic and the statistics, but can you kind of contextualize it for us maybe in terms of the impact of some of those numbers and your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you for the study, David. It's an amazing study. And as a parish priest, I always need a frame of reference in terms of how I theologically engage something. And as I was reading and praying through the study, the word exile came into my mind. If you take a look at Psalm 137, Psalm 137 starts out, by the rivers of Babylon. There's a famous song and stuff like that. it's about a community of people who have lost the temple. They are in exile in Babylon. And as I read through the study, what intrigued me is the fact that we are also in a form of exile in this corona tide. And in the midst of exile, the prophetic challenge for someone like Jeremiah, for instance, is to remind the people that whatever you are, whatever you're doing, always look towards a greater hope, one, and always work for the good of the city. So how does that translate into the study? I think in two ways. One is the recognition that we are in this sort of exile. Two, it's the church. So part of the study also indicated that churches that were, there was a significant giving from the churches to other churches that were in need. So like the community that was in exile, they contributed towards the common good. Jeremiah 29 talks about looking into the prosperity of the city, working for the prosperity of the city, even when you are in disparate times. So I think that actually, that sort of analogy works for us as well. In the midst of this pandemic, people are choosing to give if they are able to. Institutions are choosing to give to other institutions that so desperately need it. So that's one lesson, theological lesson that I took. And then, I have life after exile and all that, but let me just focus on exile for a minute. The other thing is adaptability. The church has become adaptive during this time. Most churches that are able to become adaptive have adapted according to the situation. The church is more resilient than I would have ever thought. And just reading through the study and looking at how the church has migrated in different ways has been interesting. I think that gives us a hope for Christianity. We are not stuck in the mud necessarily. We are an adaptive faith. Three, the notion of integrity. So going back to the exile metaphor, in the book of Daniel, it accounts for a group of young Jewish men who were serving in the court of Babylon and led a life of integrity, centered on the common themes of their faith, centered on the cultus, the religious understanding and ethical responsibility and obligation of their faith. I think that translates into the church living into its faith deeply while not being able to worship together. People have lived into their faith in different ways, but centered on the hope of resurrection. So I think in many ways, the study has been very fascinating to me during this time of exile.
Wonderful. I lost the unmute button there for a second. I was wondering if we could actually spend a moment on that kind of discussion of exile, because one of the most interesting parts to me in this study was that discussion of the impact on small congregations. And since, as specifically at Episcopal trends, right, the prominence, the increase in numbers of small congregations, and some of the interesting things, it's on page 4, in case everyone's looking at their printed, was the idea of kind of moving to online, but also the online giving, right? And some of the impact that had on smaller congregations. And I was wondering, David and Manoj and Bill, if we can spend a moment talking about the impact of COVID on specifically on small congregations, and then also that ability, as you said, Manoj, right, adapt, and some of the issues that these smaller congregations have to kind of adapt to online. And maybe from there, if I may be so bold, discuss maybe some ways, Bill, if you might know of ways that we can actually kind of offer, suggest in that frame of hope, kind of leading us through. It's like a 3-part question there. I know it's very complicated. I have so many ideas. David, if we could just start with you in discussing some of the impact on the smaller congregations in particular.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it's important maybe to stress that congregations of all sizes were able to succeed and to be quite adaptive. But what we have seen is it has hit the smallest congregations. These are congregations under 50, sometimes under 100. And I think it's to your point. I think the infrastructure, whether it was technology or personnel or staff, to be able to make that quick shift. We saw basically all congregations are closing within a 2-week time period there in March. And so if you had that infrastructure, that technology, the budget to help make that shift happen faster, you were in a better place. And oftentimes those smaller congregations were more limited in having that already in place. That being said, I think it was pretty amazing to see the adaptability that what we saw pretty quickly. And most of that energy first went to how to stream or how to adapt services online. Services, small groups, even vestry or committee meetings. And then usually giving came second. So a lot of clergy put their energy on getting services back up and running, making that shift. If you had digital giving platforms already in place, that was an easier shift for you. Those who didn't, I think, had to find that. And there are a number of options. And I would say, to Manoj's point, what we've seen, not only are churches helping churches, really 30% of all congregations were supporting other congregations or nonprofits with new types of funding, not just continuing their regular mission giving, but finding new ways to help congregations or nonprofits in need. And I say that oftentimes happened in kind sort of ways. So one congregation helping another learn how to use Zoom, sharing maybe a paid Zoom account so that they can sort of find ways to kind of keep up and running. Helping seniors, and yet you saw young people helping seniors figure out ways to engage on the phone. These are the kinds of things that we saw that I think are very hopeful. I would say a concern was oftentimes we saw that particularly for churches, we weren't cutting personnel. Furloughs, reductions in staff were one of the last things that went. Part of that, I'd say, is due to the PPP loan program that allowed many congregations to maintain that staff. An open question will be what will happen as we move forward into the next year when most of those funds have been used up at this point. But for small churches in particular, that was the place where we saw the largest percentage of cutbacks in staff. My guess is that those smaller congregations are already quite lean, and there wasn't a lot of fat in the budget to cut. And so I would imagine many, even clergy, are sometimes making the tough decision to cut back their own hours or to take a smaller, to cut on their own pay, knowing that that's probably the largest percentage of the congregation's budget. So something to watch for. Congregations maybe smaller, under greater threat, had more challenges, but demonstrated quite a bit of adaptability and resilience, to Manoj's point as well.
As David, as you were talking, I was also thinking about the fact that I believe the ASA and the Episcopal circles of the median size of congregations has gone down from 53 to 51. And in the midst of that, having served as a rector in smaller congregations predominantly, it's an amazing skill set. So my heart goes out to priests, pastors, folks who are in the smaller congregations who need to do the pastoral care, who need to set out the entrepreneurial agenda, have to make sure the wider community is kept intact, and also look for the common good. So reading in between, it's amazing to see how I'm going to make the assumption that lay leadership also stepped up during this time to support the pastor or the vicar, the rector, in doing that ministry. So in that way, that sort of participation has truly increased because I'm going to make the presumption that lay folks felt more empowered to do the ministry of carrying out the mission of the church, understanding that times are going to be tough.
So something that's, I don't have I don't exactly have like data quite as granular as what the Lake Institute has put forward, but a little better than anecdotal, but not quite scientific. Having conversations across the church, I've been really fascinated by what's been going on in places like the Upper Peninsula, Diocese of Northern Michigan, places places where they have like a mutual ministry background, and they've been doing this for a long time. They actually added staff during this period of time as a whole throughout the region, and it largely has to do with their the kind of crisis that we as Episcopalians often worry about, where the financial structures may fall apart, or kind of any kind of like any kind of a way in which we imagine some sort of bad event happening. Well, some of that's already happened, and it turned out to be not that bad after all, and it has actually been really great for their ministry. And Andrew McKellar is on this. I saw her name on our list, and the Diocese of South Carolina, the Episcopal Diocese of South Carolina, what they've had to go through leading up to even before COVID. What we're seeing is there's a resiliency already in the system. Now, I mean, granted, smaller churches, yes, we already have been worried about churches whose ASA is decreasing, and I keep saying that COVID is not a change agent; it's an evolutionary accelerant. And so, yes, those churches that we were worried about, we should be more worried about now. But it's the churches, for me, that are kind of in the middle, right? So like your very large, well-resourced churches, they can tap into endowment, or maybe their giving didn't really fall off. But these churches who maybe they don't have quite the active giving program, or maybe they don't have a large endowment, but they have large staff. Those are the ones that I'm personally most concerned about and kind of keep in my prayer. But also, they're the ones that have the greatest motivation for change and for experimentation and for innovation. And so that's what I'm most excited about.
Bill, I mean, so to that point, so I can talk about my context. St. Anne's in Annapolis is we have 430 plus on a Sunday. Well, we used to pre-COVID-19. Supposedly participation and attendance has gone up based on the metrics that have been provided. We have comparatively a large staff. We do not have significant endowment resources, but we do have an endowment. And I am perpetually worried about what is the stewardship season going to look like. I am perpetually worried about, because most of our investment, our budgetary investment, is in personnel, it's in staff. So there isn't a day or a night that hasn't gone by since March 8th that I haven't thought about efficiencies and adaptability. So even amidst that, it is interesting to see that, one, for the stewardship season, this annual giving season, we have been able to get new members onto the stewardship team who really believe in the mission and vision of the parish, to reinvigorate how we are doing stewardship, rather than the Sunday witness sort of deal that they usually do. We are focusing on core values. We're focusing on communicating those core values through short video clips, and sort of doing that adaptive change. And for a parish that was founded in 1692, adaptive change is very difficult, believe me. So we are living that reality as a larger parish. And then I was before this call, I was in Fresh Start, and I was listening in on a rector who is in charge of a congregation in Baltimore, whose ministry is basically centered on the distribution of food pantry ministry. And it's not a very big congregation. I think there are probably 30 or 35 on a Sunday. Yet to see even that congregation meet its core mission and value during this time has been an amazing testimony to the resiliency. Now, do they have the fat to cut? No, because they're serving a deep need. And is that congregation worried about what will happen? Yes. So I think both ends of the spectrum. These are difficult times. We are in exile, yet we also know from Scripture there's also a period after the exile where we head finally through the arc of Scripture into the New Jerusalem, where heaven and earth become one, hopefully.
Preach, brother, preach. No, I mean, that's interesting. I've been kind of, advice isn't exactly the word I would give, but in my conversations with leaders across the church, I've been inviting people to really think about the rest of this year as a capital campaign with a heavy discipleship element, right? And so treat every single gift as if it were a major gift. And Colleen Gross here actually asked a really great question around have any of these congregations done a good job of generosity as a discipleship issue? And David, I don't know if you would know anything about that, particularly from your study necessarily, but one of the things that we need to be doing a great job of in this season of stewardship is one, treating every gift as if it was immensely important, because it is. But two, also helping people realize that if they feel powerless and if they feel like they have not been able to roll up their sleeves and do something, that they can help, that there are ways in which they can help their community. Hopefully every congregation is involved in helping the community, and that by supporting initiatives at the congregation, they then would be supporting the community. But your clergy colleague from your Fresh Start, running that kind of ministry, I mean, that's a great opportunity for people to feel like they can be a part of something, even if they can't show up. Because that's the problem, right? At least I'll speak for myself. I feel terrible that I am unable to show up to help, to roll up my sleeves and get my hands dirty. But I can support initiatives with financially, and we need to help people not feel powerless and not feel alone and help them feel connected. And this is an opportunity to be able to do that. And certainly generosity as a discipleship issue would be a great theme to approach all of you preachers out there. By the way, Manoj, I just want to say a quick thanks for plugging Fresh Start. That is an excellent old school ECF resource that we put out into the world. Wonderful, wonderful thing to see still living on with its own inertia out there.
Wonderful. David, did you want to comment before I ask another?
Well, just quickly to say, we don't have any specific sort of stories there because we just have kind of that data at this point. But having done this work for so long, just like you all have, I think that's exactly the right approach. Thinking about all of this as relational work, and generosity is, and stewardship generally is about discipleship. So I think particularly now, as Bill mentioned, this is about discipleship and pastoral care. And so building those relational connection points, communicating clearly the mission and vision of the congregation, as it's probably stayed the same, but you're living into a new reality, a new normal. So continue to be focused in on what got you here to this point, and communicate not only the needs of the congregation, but what you're doing to address the larger communities in which you're a part. And I think doing that now is key, but I think it gives you a lot of space to try some new ideas, to be creative. Maybe I would reframe it and say not so much about just innovation because we're in a different space, but moving outside of maybe some types of stewardship programs that maybe have gotten a little stale. You know, you've always done it this way. I think we can't afford not to really engage at that personal relational level right now and think about how we're stewarding that gift of generosity, not only for the life of the institution, but really to promote that generosity as a gift of discipleship for individuals and families. And caring for them in that way, I think, is a great way to, just as Bill mentioned.
Right, Adrian. I mean, just to bank off of what David and Bill said, because I think it's fascinating. The notion of generosity and discipleship are actually part and parcel of each other. They are so entwined. And centering that on the mission and vision of the church is quite important. Anecdotally, this Sunday, in the Propers is the golden calf incident. And if you take it from one perspective, Aaron led the most successful stewardship drive. It was, so think about it. People gave all the wealth that they had to make a golden calf, right? So in many ways, it's an interesting stewardship model in that sort of idolatry. But at the same time, it makes you want to think. In the midst of wilderness, in the midst of uncertainty, people need something tangible to grab onto. And if that is based on mission and vision, centered on who we know as God incarnate through the ministry of the church, why not utilize those deep resources that we have and develop the relationships, make the calls to encourage people to be more generous within their means, and say every gift, as Bill said, there is no small gift this year. Every gift is a gift.
So the only thing the piece that I like, the little asterisk I add to this is that, like, we're all exhausted. This year has been brutal. It continues to be brutal. If any of y'all are following the news right now, there was just a news flash that came across about some group trying to kidnap the governor of Michigan and the FBI stopping it. This is an exhausting thing, and we are all at the end of our rope. And when I say to people things like, well, you know, you should be running like a major gift capital campaign for your stewardship drive to complete the year, people look at me like I've asked them to go run 12 marathons. And I just want to say out loud that I realize that sounds exhausting. And I don't have great news for you other than to say that I know it sounds exhausting. Try to do it in a way that isn't exhausting. But I don't have a fresh idea other than not taking it completely on your own, right? So Manoj mentioned just briefly in a comment there of bringing new people into the stewardship campaign process for the fall. That is absolutely vital this year. If there's ever been a year for you to finally figure out a way to break up, remember the old every member canvas idea that still is around, but it's not necessarily the most in vogue stewardship method. It's time to bring that old plan out and dust it off and invite other people into the process this year in order for you not to get just exhausted and dragged down into overworking yourself more than, and we all are, more than you already have been.
So, David, did you want to continue?
Well, just on one point, I think one thing we did find in the survey, which is not new knowledge to any of you all, is that the pressures, the anxieties that religious leaders are holding right now are just even more extreme than we usually do, right? So one question that found for us was around reopening and that becoming a more polarized question. We even tested it, around public health, or, if you have an endowment in reserves, are you more likely to wait? And that was partly true, but really it boiled down to sort of pressures, polarized pressures to reopen or not. And we found a quarter of our congregations were evenly split when we, the pastor would answer the survey and say, in her congregation, half were adamantly ready to reopen and half were radically opposed. And for many of even our purple congregations, I think this weighs even more strongly on their shoulders, and will continue and obviously in the months ahead. But to Bill's point, I think this is something that we can't do alone. And, my colleagues at the School of Philanthropy were engaged in thinking around fundraising and philanthropy in all sectors. But, I do say I couldn't be a really effective fundraiser outside of the faith organizations with which I work, because there's something sort of as that added benefit. And it is that gospel message, that kingdom mindset that Manoj drew us to. So there is that sense of confidence that we have in this broader story in which we work, that becomes sort of the light that can continue to push us forward. It's not just relying on our shoulders, but to bring other people around you in this space is super important. We've all seen, I would imagine, fundraising appeals in the past few months that fell flat. I would really, really caution you not to kind of create something that says, everybody, let's do this right now. We need support or else we're going to close our doors, these kinds of things. Clearly, you need to use your pastoral sensibilities in relational capital and having those conversations. And I think that's something that we as religious leaders excel at. That is one of our great gifts. That's why we've been called into this work. And so, go into this work with that confidence that that's how we can approach that work.
So we've kind of carried on this conversation beyond one of the questions I wanted to kind of get in there and get a kind of another layer to this lasagna, if you will. And that is, yes, very academic, is talking about this digital divide. So for those of you following, that's on page 4. I really wanted to make sure that we talk about our smaller and rural congregations, and talk about the impact of kind of what the impact will be during the stewardship season. And I know, Bill, that you mentioned kind of the fatigue and what that means for our brothers and sisters in the Episcopal Church, our brothers and sisters in the Christian church writ large. So I was wondering if there was any, David, if there were any kind of, whether it's anecdotes or some data that you might be able to talk about kind of the impact on those smaller congregations.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we did find was that of those congregations who did not have digital platforms around giving in particular before, a good number, over a third of those congregations did find ways to add those in the weeks that followed. So what I was encouraged to see, and this is a competitive industry, there are lots of great platforms that work really well across the board, and we work with many of them. That actually, I was really ramped up their willingness to engage with congregations even more so than they already did. And so they were there really to help and walk through with congregations. So I would say if you still don't have that as a part of your congregation, I think it's something that it's vital to have in some form. And it's helpful if you have it. That's great. But if you don't ever talk about it, then it sort of just sits there. But I'm very conscious in our work, really, that this is generosity and stewardship work is not just technical work. It's that adaptive work that Manoj is pointing to, and it's deeply intertwined with culture and tradition. So, when I'll be in front of an Episcopal group sometime and talk about how, the majority of congregations by far don't have pledge campaigns. And the Episcopalians are like, that can't be, but so we're enculturated into particular types of generosity. So if you're in a tradition that if I pulled out my phone and texted to give in the midst of a service back early 2020, and someone would give me the side eye that I was pulling out my phone in the worship service, you have to sort of also build out and think about how this sort of finds its way into the culture of your congregation. So getting the technical fixes there, that should be easy. And I would say if you don't have that, reach out to groups like Episcopal Church Foundation, other denominational groups, they're there for you to help you in that space. This is where our denominations and our families actually are really helpful, and our sister congregation. So that we can do, but then thinking specifically about how do we communicate that these options are out there, and how does it fit in with the culture of our congregation? And I think that, even beyond digital giving, I've seen some extremely creative ways of people doing non-digital types of giving as well. Just, reminding people they can mail in checks. Now you can go pick up the mail, or you can find other interesting ways to make that happen, demonstrating at the same time that you're sort of taking care of you're making sure to follow best practices, let's say, around how to administer and manage those funds that come in. So just remind people that you've got these in place, but it has to be more than simply having the technical fix. You've got to help communicate how that fits into your congregation's culture, and help people to embrace it.
David, that's it. So I was in like the height of the pandemic, when everyone was scrambling to get to how are we going to do online worship, and how are we going to do online giving, and what are we going to do? I was doing a series of webinars with different dioceses, and I can't remember if it was Pennsylvania or New Jersey. It doesn't really matter. But I was working with a congregation to help get their online giving program up. And the rector just basically like put a mailbox up outside of their church that was it was like a locked box system just for people to drop checks in. And that system beat their fancy new online giving system like 10-1. Because people just wanted to put the check, they wanted to come and be there and drop the check off, and they weren't congregating there. They weren't, it was very safe. And he said that people were literally wearing like rubber kitchen gloves and dropping their checks off into the box. But you're right. We've actually got a question here in the Q&A about online giving, people not being able to participate in online giving, mainly because they don't have banking or credit cards. And so what we have to do for these more urban or even rural ministry for people, I'm from Georgia, and there's a great ministry out with the migrant laborers. I mean, they're not giving through online giving, and probably not, that's not the point of that ministry, but still we have lots of different cultural touch points that come into our denomination, and we do have to think creatively and wisely about how we encourage generosity, stewardship, but also encourage people to take care of themselves.
Absolutely. I think, in just acknowledging the technological divide is imperative, even in urban areas. The lack of access and the inability to connect for education, for giving. I mean, these are trends that are there. And I'm wondering, what is the role of adjudicatories, diocesan offices in this? Especially, I saw a colleague of mine, a colleague of mine from a former diocese, chat in a question, which is an interesting question. I mean, I deeply wonder about, how congregations can help each other, especially when there are sister congregations that are well resourced, where there are dioceses that are well resourced, that can actually provide or help provide the infrastructure necessary so that people give. So even going back to the theology of giving, I think people want to give what they can, and working on that, and capacity enabling and building for people who want to give out of an active discipleship should be the role of adjudicatories, should be the role of congregations that have multiple staff people to assist congregations that don't, despite the distance, because I think that's our role as called together in Christ.
So Manoj, are you suggesting that resource parishes actually be a resource?
Absolutely.
Wow, what a great
I know.
idea. What an amazing idea.
What a revolutionary idea. I mean, a sister congregation had some technology issues, and they have a food pantry, and the freezer broke down. And I was surprised at how quickly, within an hour and a half, St. Anne's raised funds to plug in, and thought it not as a burden, but as our moral imperative, as our duty to help a sister congregation. And there are numerous congregations that are doing this, resource congregations that are doing this. And it's about developing that relationship as equal partners in the ministry, in the vineyard that God has collectively called us to serve.
Thank you. And thank you, Paula, for adding a layer to that, right? That discussion of the digital technological divide. I think it's imperative that we talk about that, especially as we talk about things as part of our everyday lives. Zoom, technology, right? There's more to that. There are layers to that. There are ideas of privilege, of race and ethnicity. Bill, hand up there. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in here real quick too, because I feel like there was a piece of Paula's particular question that we didn't necessarily address, which is, you know, the mailbox story was great, and it was it worked well for that individual congregation. But when, you know, there are many places where that's not going to work. You know, that might be asking people to hop on public transportation when that isn't the right thing to do. You know, the neighborhood adjacent to mine here in Alexandria has been a hot spot and continues to be a hot spot. The services that have gone in there have had to really figure out, how do we serve the neighborhood and how do we serve this community with intentionality, with respect, with respecting the dignity of the people here, but also making sure that everyone is protected and understands how to protect themselves and understands the right things to do. And there have been some churches that have gotten involved in that effort. And I just want to offer that, you know, while yes, going into communities and being physically present in communities takes on risk and requires some risk assessment, abatement, and protection, it is possible. People are doing it. I have my wife is involved in politics here in the DC area, and I have been studying how both Republicans and Democrats are starting their door knocking campaigns. It is not by any stretch of the imagination a well-oiled machine yet, but they are figuring out how to actually go and do this very essential part of the campaigning process. And I think that we can learn, we can figure out ways to actually go and visit. There is a priest in Arizona who just made the Episcopal News Service for doing just this. I believe she is going house to house and sitting at the end of the driveway or sitting at the end of the property line and being very distant, but having conversations with her congregants. And I think that there are creative ways that we can do this. Again, that may sound exhausting. And again, don't do it on your own, right? That's important.
Thank you. I'm just finding that story. I was going to put that story in the chat box for everyone. Oh, and there you go. Haley, magical, absolutely magic. Thank you, Haley. I'm just being mindful of our time together, that we have just 10 minutes left. So please, for those of you who still have questions, please remember chat box or Q&A. But one of the questions I really wanted to ask before we kind of run out of time as these conversations keep going is really to look at, are there any offerings of advice or thoughts based on this data or anecdotal and experience in the parish of some kind of critical things that parish leadership might want to consider in order to kind of engage and lead their parish and their communities towards this future effectively. David, maybe there were some things that you gleaned from the research that you might be able to share.
Yeah, just a couple things from the research, and then just sort of some intuition or gut from spending a lot of time talking with congregational leaders and across the board. I think we all feel it. I'm a little fearful, a little worried that we're reaching a sense of kind of Zoom fatigue across the board. So we saw spikes in attendance, for instance, when we sort of measured participation in those first few months. People were excited about sort of zooming in to church in their PJs, but also just generally the variety of ways we could, to engage. And we are seeing, at least in our survey, by the end of June and kind of on into the summer, giving year over year decline. And so that's not just a summer slump, that's, year over year. So I'm a little worried that across the board, particularly as we don't, it's in many parts of our country, don't really see a clear end in sight to doing kind of what we're doing, that we're going to reach a point where we can't quite just keep up the same pace. We'll find folks who are just, not only are they overwhelmed with, Zoom calls and work and childcare and all those kinds of things, but it's just, as far as mental health and public health is sort of at the top of, they're at the top of what they can give. So I would use that. I would be mindful of that within your own community, thinking about sort of not just trying to, again, what we've mentioned, just throw one big type of annual stewardship campaign on top of what else folks can't handle. But think about ways we can kind of engage that. Be mindful. Maybe there's some tweaks or new ideas as we, in my own congregation, we've been meeting in the parking lot, sort of socially distanced. We were able to make that work, but in Indiana, that's not going to work very much longer because it gets cold. So, what are we going to think about? Are we going to go back to Zoom? So these are the kinds of questions I think to think about as fatigue sets in as we move into the next year. The other question that we noted that was that over half of congregations plan to keep their budgets the same next year, 52%. No congregation was expecting to raise their budget, which is a bit surprising. Not a single optimistic congregation was going to go that direction. But I think, again, narrating your story, it would be a success for most congregations to be able to sustain their budget in a 2021 year with so much uncertainty. Tell those stories of success. Tell what you've done this past year and what you're planning to do. It's not just maintaining. One thing we learned was that there were a lots of new fundraising appeals is what congregations were hoping to do to make things better, but not, we weren't asking, but it was, again, what would that look like? So think about how you can kind of frame those conversations as we look ahead, but being mindful of our own mental health, our own capacities, and particularly of those, who stepped in these past 6 months, as Bill mentioned, new leaders that came in, or those that you obviously can continue to rely on. I think it's going to be I think we're entering a new time in the midst of these multiple pandemics that will, it's a new normal. But to use that as an excuse to sort of imagine what a new normal would look like on the other side of this for your own congregation.
David, thank you. We have a question from Moshe right here in the Q&A. Sheila, if we can get to yours, great. I am typing an answer to you in the Q&A. Moshe, your first question about productive stewardship this year, I tried to type an answer to. So folks, if you go down the Q&A at the bottom, you'll see some of that. But his question was, any ideas of bringing the new online folks into our parishes? And I've been part of some experimentation with some congregations around this. I won't say that all of it is going great. People are visiting you online because they may not live near you actually, even if Facebook says they're down the street from you, sometimes that's not really true. Two, the people I've talked to, a lot of people really like being in online church and maybe don't necessarily look forward to coming back to in person. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. But the other thing I just want to say is that a lot of the online worship services that I attend, people don't ask you know, you just have to ask. You have to ask people to give during online worship. It's essential. You need to make the ask. It works. The little bit of data we have says that it works. People do make gifts during online worship, and you should ask people to come to church when you're ready. When you're open and ready, you should be asking people to come and be physical with you if they're comfortable, as they're comfortable. But I would love other people to, I mean, knows you actually have a congregation. I just play with congregations as a side gig. So please.
You know, jokingly, in the old days, if you could do a reverse DNS entry, you could actually find out who the where the online subscriber is pinging from. But I think unless folks identify who they are, it is very difficult for any one of us to track. We do have on staff someone who works with Invite, Welcome, Connect, who, when they notice someone who has signed in and identifies themselves as someone who's not a member of the congregation, will engage that person online and try to extrapolate data so that we could send them a welcome letter, send them some information about the parish, and things like that. And always planting the seed. We are open. We've never been closed. We've only transported worship virtually, in person, wherever. Keep inviting people online. Keep inviting people and asking their friends to log in online. If they're ready, willing, and able, come through the door. And also developing the mechanisms for contact tracing, etc., that is necessary in safeguarding the community. And never being reticent to ask. Never being reticent to ask. You know, the most that anyone can say is no. That's fine. They may have their reasons, but if we don't ask, we'll never receive.
Thank you very much, everyone. I just want to be aware of our time together. So before I ask our panelists for any kind of final thoughts, hope, wisdom, I see Barbara asking a question about some breakdown of stats. So I'm wondering, David, maybe if you'd be able to email those to me and I can send those out to everyone with a recording of this, so we can kind of have a nice little package for everyone. And also, because we are recording this, this will be up on the ECF YouTube page, as we will be posting it as well on our ecfvp.org. Not to worry, all of those websites will be coming in email. So I wanted to just make sure that we can get some of that more detailed data, if you will, out to all of our participants. So before I say thanks, David, Manoj, Bill, any final thoughts on some of the data and what we've been talking about today?
Well, for me, just a thank you to the work that you all do, and to the work that you all do who are on this call. I know what a great challenge and what a great vocation this is, and so I'm grateful for the work that you do. I think to Manoj's opening points, you know, while we're in the midst of exile, that there is a lot of resilience, innovation, and congregations throughout our history have been the most adaptive types of organizations. And I do think, to Bill's point, this is more of an accelerant to a lot of trends we've already seen. And I do think we'll be in a new normal. You know, I do think we'll come out of this in a different space. But I see that not as something to regret or to opine, but really as an opportunity to live into. So I would encourage you to use this as a chance to really engage in creative ways in your ministry.
I mean, just a word of encouragement and a word of gratitude. One, thank you for all of you who are in the ministry of the church, lay ordained. Thank you for everything that you do. May God continue to empower us in our ministries together. Thank you to Episcopal Church Foundation. Thank you to the Lake Institute. In terms of closing thought, I pointed to the exile, and I want to point to the fact that there is life after exile. Whether it's Zerubbabel, Ezra, or Nehemiah, we are called to form community and to rebuild with creativity, with integrity, centered on the values that we received through the incarnate Lord, who died and rose again. So may that hope be with us, the hope of Easter, continue to guide and nurture us even during these times.
The only thing I want to say to everyone is, like, look, you are doing enough. I want to just, like, that's just to piggyback on what Manoj said. You're doing enough. And yes, this was a webinar about a study that was taken, and some of the implications of the study is that there's more that needs to be done if you want to raise the funds for your organization. But I just want you to know that you're doing enough. And that we know that this year has just been brutal, and that it feels like we're not even halfway through it, even though we're in October. That we're here for you. We're praying for you. And we love every one of you and are so proud of all the work that you're doing. So please just keep it up. Thank you.
Wonderful. I just want to say thank you to all of those who attended. Thank you to our panelists for your wisdom and your gifts. I just want to thank David King and the Lake Institute for all of your research and data. For many of us who are data junkies, this is just fascinating stuff to really dig into. Yeah, Manoj, that's right. It's good stuff to nerd out to. And thank you, Manoj, for really kind of contextualizing this, matching our theology, and really giving some depth to these numbers. That was incredibly powerful. Bill, I work with Bill, so Bill, thanks. I'll see you tomorrow.
I'll probably see you in a few minutes on some other Zoom that we have to be on, but yes.
Well, Bill, thank you so much, as always, for your wisdom and your words. And again, everyone, you'll be receiving an email, with some more data from David once I get that, and a recording of this to share with as many people as possible. You'll also be receiving some websites and connect emails so that we can keep this conversation going, and also that we can actually connect you to people who might be able to assist you in different ways to continue this conversation. So please feel free. Oh, Bill, yes, hand up.
I just, you never deny someone the opportunity to express their generosity. And so for those of you who benefited from this webinar, from any of the wonderful resources that we provide, please make a gift to the Episcopal Church Foundation. We would really appreciate your generosity and support right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. All right, everyone, please have a blessed day. Stay safe and healthy and be well. Thank you again, Manoj and David, and we hope to see you soon on another webinar. Bye-bye, everyone. Have a lovely day.